Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Hey, I am happy to have on the program today someone who is going to teach you how to get what you want. His name is Josh Bandoch, and he's the author of a book by that very name. And we're going to learn a lot about the fine art of persuasion. Josh, first of all, thanks for coming on my show. Take a moment here. Tell me and tell my audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and what inspired you to write this book.
Brian, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Persuasion is the difference between having a good idea and having other people embrace that idea. And starting with my time in academia, I saw so many people, really high IQ, who just weren't able to communicate their ideas in a way that had others embrace them, despite being super smart. Ivy League degrees, teaching at Ivy League schools didn't matter. They weren't persuasive. And then throughout my time post academia in fundraising and working in communications as a speechwriter and a strategic communications consultant for senior government officials and for Booz Allen Hamilton. Same thing. Lots of really good ideas, really good policy ideas by senior government officials, sometimes communicated really effectively. Amazing. Sometimes not. What was the difference there? It was persuasion. And then as a policy advocate, which is one of the hats that I wear now, lots of good ideas. There's a lot of data and logic and rigor behind those ideas, and they're not communicated effectively. And what this results in for people is a glass ceiling that's way too low, way too low. So, this book is for people who want to crash through that glass ceiling and they know that IQ is never, ever, ever enough, and that emotional intelligence is absolutely foundational to persuasion. And when you bring those two together, you can crash through your glass ceiling, and the sky is the limit.
Well, this makes sense then why the subtitle for your book is Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion. And I guess it figures it would be a little bit of both. When I think of persuasive people, I'm sorry, one of the first things that comes to mind is, oh, yes, used car salesman. But is that really persuasion that they're using, or is it something else?
They're using manipulation. Okay.
Ah,
So let me talk about what I think persuasion is not and what it is, and then we'll distinguish it from manipulation. There are two really big misconceptions of what persuasion is. Whenever I do workshops, give talks, I ask people, and these are two of the most common. And when you think about persuasion in one of these two ways, it creates an enormous barrier to persuasion, to getting what you want. The first big misconception is that we think that persuasion is about winning. Brian, when I win against you, what does that make you?
well, that makes me a loser.
Lose. And that's terrible. Do you want to work with somebody who makes you feel like a loser?
Oh, absolutely not.
No, if anything, you want to oppose them afterwards. Okay. So persuasion cannot be about winning. And a lot of people think that persuasion is about convincing someone to think like them. And the trouble starts when you look at the Latin root of the word convince. It means to vanquish or to conquer. And conquest is barbaric, it's not persuasive. Incidentally, there's only one person who thinks like you, Brian. Any idea who that is?
That would be me.
That's you. And I don't even agree with everything that I did yesterday. If I can't agree with myself all the time, how can I possibly agree with anybody else all the time? Okay. Well, if those aren't persuasion, what is? Persuasion is shared action. It's shared because it's something that we voluntarily do with others, and it's action because it is about getting things done. So your mind goes exactly to the place where a lot of people go, well, what's the difference between persuasion and manipulation? And it's all about intentions. The the art and science that I lay out in the book, it's true. You can use that for bad stuff. Sociopaths and psychopaths, they they get some bad things that they want. So what's the difference? Well, think the Force in Star Wars. Do you want to be Yoda or the Emperor? Do you want to be Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader? Think about a tool like a knife. Chefs use tools this tool, a knife, to cook beautiful meals and serve them to people. You can also do great harm to somebody with a knife. What are your intentions? If your intention is to manipulate somebody, is bad news. The missionary reason to not manipulate is that it's wrong. And the mercenary reason is that it's going to catch up with you and much faster than you think.
Josh, I'm thinking even the great Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato would agree with you because what you're describing is virtue. And I mean virtue in the sense that it's freely chosen. In other words, it's not that I knew the right words or the right way to wink to steer you in a particular direction. It's that I was able to persuade in such a way that you voluntarily said, I will go along with it. I will help you with what you're asking me to do, as opposed to, I just simply twisted your arm until you finally said uncle, so I would stop.
Look, our conclusion today can be that persuasion is a virtue. We're going to add that to the list of cardinal virtues. And it is in a lot of ways because it is other oriented, it is collaborative, it's voluntary. You get things done. It's not just about speaking pretty words. Going back to the Greeks is usually a good idea, at least for starters. And in fact, Aristotle had some foundational insights about what persuasion is and how it works that hold true to this day. The psychology and neuroscience, they're with Aristotle on this. So yeah, going back to the Greeks, good idea.
So let's kind of break this down. We can't go through the whole book, and actually, we want people to look at your book, to purchase your book, and we'll tell them how to do that. But let's talk about. I know you can break it down into three kind of sections about this art and science of persuasion. Let's start with part one. What is the persuader's mindset?
Persuader's mindset. I'll start with a story about John. He was an intern with me a couple of summers ago. Smart kid, nice kid, goes to a good school. And John thought that the way to get what he wants is to talk a lot, to wave his hand, say, hey, hey, call on me, even to interrupt other people to make sure that he said what he needed to say. And that makes sense. That's how we're wired. We're wired to put ourselves first. So we adopt what I call a me first mindset. Talking about ourselves generates the same sensations in our brain as sex and money, so it feels really good. And that's how we're trained. John was always taught, John, you're a smart kid. Raise your hand and show us how smart you are. Okay. What's the trouble with that? Well, John was even interrupting me, which is probably not like a good idea. And at some point I was like, do you like when people interrupt you? And over the course of summer, he totally flipped the script and he went from putting himself first, which is unpersuasive, to putting the team first. And he just started to excel. Although one day he came in and he was like, you never guess what happened last night? And I'm like, what's that? And he said, well, I was talking to my girlfriend and she started telling me about a problem at her internship she was having. And I just started talking and she got really annoyed. She was like, why can't you just listen? And he was like, ah, okay. So he started to listen. They started to feel more connected. He asked some questions, understood, asked some questions about how to proceed. So John adopted what I call the persuader's mindset, which is that it's about them, not you, which means that you have to put them first. And it worked out really well for John. By the end of the summer, he was outperforming all the other interns, and we kept him on and gave him a promotion. It's just that we're wired to think about ourselves, and that's not persuasive.
Interesting. It's hard to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, though.
100%. And it's in your interest to do that. The missionary reason is that it's the right thing to do when you're authentically engaging with somebody. Again, there's the authenticity, the intentions there. When you're authentically interested in somebody else and engaging with them, the other person feels that. I feel it when somebody's authentically engaged with me, it's powerful. And when they understand me and can demonstrate understanding, that's powerful. And oftentimes that's enough to get what you want, just so that somebody else feels heard. The mercenary reason is that putting them first is the best way to get what you want. And I explain this in more depth in the book. How do you do that? Well, it starts with listening because we think that persuasion is all about talking. No, no. Oftentimes it's much more about listening. And when the other person's talking, what are you listening for? You're listening for overlap. The things that you want to need, the things that they want to need. And as you let them talk about whatever it is, a business deal, a job offer, something at home you're negotiating with your spouse, whatever it is, and you say, well, what are your top priorities? What are the things that you really want? They start to tick them off. And usually they're going to start to list things, and some or many of those will sound pretty good to you. So you can actually give them what they want, which is what you want. You can say, well, look, okay, you told me 10 things, six of those, I can totally do that. And then you figure out one or two of your top priorities and say, look, as long as you do these one or two things for me. Whereas if you had led with the things that you wanted, they feel a little bit defensive. And then, you're the one who has to kind of respond to their thing. So listen, identify overlap, start there, because that also greases the wheels for future shared action.
I know anyone who has had, sales training, part of their training is going to be, well, you got to overcome the objections. Talk to me about the difference between simply overcoming objections and actually giving them a reason to buy into your vision.
100%. There are two parts there. One of the biggest things that I've learned in the decade working on this book is that persuasion isn't exactly a bit, it's not about getting somebody to do something per se, first and foremost. It's about removing barriers to them doing it because they're not doing it now. So you have to identify what's stopping somebody from proceeding. And if you don't do that, even if what you say sounds really good, there's going to still be something that stops them from doing it. So the top secret, really stealthy way to identify barriers to shared action is, wait for it, to ask them. So, one of the really great questions to ask, say you're trying to negotiate a business deal, instead of saying, all right, like, we're good, right? It's like, no, no. Ask them, okay, what would stop you from signing this deal? And then see what they say. And people give an unguarded answer because you're only asking about what would stop them, not why aren't you doing this? And they'll tell you. And oftentimes, what you think about what's stopping them is not what's actually stopping them. And when you make those false assumptions, you can't navigate them. So you identify the barriers, they'll tell you. You might think it's all about financing, but it might be about a contract they have with another vendor or a relationship they have with another vendor. And if you don't know which one it is, you can't navigate it. So first, you have to identify barriers, address them, and remove them, and then action. That happens, as you alluded to, most importantly with a vision. Because big picture, what animates action? Vision. Your vision for, let's say you're the president and CEO of a company. Well, what's going to animate your employees to come to work day after day after day and work hard? It's a vision. It's a vision that motivates them because ideally it's not just a job, it's a career and they like it. Maybe they're even passionate about it. And without a vision, you don't know where you're going. You have no North Star, but rather you are rudderless. So you have to be able to articulate a vision that resonates with your audience.
Josh, let's talk now about how our brains work as it applies to persuasion. This is the scientific part, correct?
Yeah. 100%. So there are four aspects of our wiring, three of which make persuasion really hard. And the fourth one, if we bring all this together, unlocks persuasion. I'll go through them really quickly and then we can dive into any of the ones that you'd like. The first, and anybody who is intellectually oriented pretty much hates this one. I used to hate it. This is how everybody's wired, all 8 billion of us. We feel first, then reason. Sometimes it's feel, boom, reason. Sometimes it's feel, then reason. Sometimes it's feel and we never get to reasoning. I've been there. What that means is that persuasion starts with feelings. What kinds of feelings? Well, take a look around, it's obvious. Negative feelings. Well, they're not persuasive. What feelings are persuasive? Positive feelings. And how do you generate them? You have to be for something. And what's the best way to generate positive feelings? To appeal to your audience's values, even if they aren't your values, which is really hard because our values are wired into us. And then, what is the best way to appeal to somebody's values? With a story. And we are wired to be story processors.
So
That's
talk to me.
the top level version of our wiring.
Talk to me about if I want to tell stories that will actually move the needle for people, what do those stories have to contain?
There are the nuts and bolts, and then there's one of the big value adds of my book. The nuts and bolts of a story are simple. You have to have a hero, and he or she has to go on a journey. That's what all movies are, what all stories are. One of the tricky things here, though, is that oftentimes we make ourselves the hero of the story. That doesn't come off nearly as well as if you make somebody else the hero of the story. Like I told you about John. Look, John and I literally just texted last night. Okay, so we still have a relationship. He's a great kid. And if I had instead talked about how I had overcome this obstacle, how I am so great, that just doesn't come off as well. So have a hero that's not you, and he has to go on a journey, and he has this moment. And the moments for John were um, interrupting your boss, probably not a good idea. And then interrupting your girlfriend and she gets annoyed. Oh, light bulb goes back off. Okay, cool. And then great result at the end, which is that we did keep him on and we did give him a promotion. Cool. Okay. That's like nuts and bolts. There's a plot, there's a couple kinds of plots in stories. I go over them. Okay. That's like the nuts and bolts. Here's the big value out of the book. We are never told what kinds of stories. We're told to tell stories. You have to tell morally motivating, emotionally intelligent stories. How do you do that? Well, the morally motivating part is to appeal to their values. And I unpack in the book what some of the core values that people tend to have are and how those values tend to sort out based on people's political beliefs so that you know what has to happen in a story to resonate with that person, which might be different. A story that you would tell to a progressive audience is different than a story that you would tell to a conservative audience. You can still authentically advocate for the same thing, and how the arc of that story has to be different. And your stories have to proceed with emotional intelligence because persuasion starts with feelings.
Wow. I'm just taking notes here because I'm not trying to be self-deprecating, but I'm recognizing there's a lot of this stuff I've been doing wrong my whole life.
Well, it isn't so. It isn't about doing things wrong per se. It's just that while we're wired to feel first, how many people do you know that walk around and they're like, yeah, man, I just feel and sometimes I reason? Nobody does that. So we're wired to think that we are these logical creatures.
Sure.
And then why are we negative? Well, it's because we're wired with something called negativity bias. We pay way more attention to negative things than positive things. That's why, and it's a survival mechanism. It does help us survive. So it makes sense. And we're wired to a large degree to have certain values. And we're wired to think that those are the right values. How many people are like, yeah, man, these are my values, but like I know they're wrong, man. Like no, nobody says that. So these are all hardwired into us. How do you overcome this wiring to be persuasive? Well, this goes back to that other part of our wiring. We're wired to think and talk about ourselves. You got to put them first. Well, put yourself on the receiving end of these things. When somebody beats you over the head with their logic, or they try to wash away your misconceptions with what I call a logic tsunami, does that persuade you? No. When somebody unleashes a barrage of negativity on you, is that persuasive? Nope. When somebody beats you over the head with their values and those values offend you, is that persuasive? Nope. So these things are just wired into us. But if you flip your perspective, you start to see, wait a minute, I don't like it when someone does that to me. So let me really put them first. And here's how I have to reorient to get what I want.
I love it. Let's talk about some of the time-tested techniques that you write about in your book.
Sure. Anything in particular? You want to
Um,
dive in?
I know that you talk about it's not enough just to understand the things you've outlined here
Yeah,
about
yeah,
how the brain works and
yeah, yeah.
upping your game of persuasion and becoming more persuasive. But how do we put these into action? What are some of the techniques we can use to become more persuasive today?
100%. If so, three questions as techniques. If you just ask these three questions, you're going to get an insane amount of information that's extremely valuable. Oftentimes, when we have a first meeting with somebody, we want to get to business. Nope, don't do that. Terrible idea. This is how I start almost every conversation with a stranger. I say, "What's your story?" And they're like, "What?" It's like, "No, no, like, what's your story, man?" And, or I'm gonna say, "Look, I know. We're supposed to get down to business, and that sucks. I don't want to do that. Do you mind if I just ask you just one question?" They're like, "Yeah, what's up?" And I'm like, "What's your story?" They're like, "What?" I say, "No, what's your story?" They're like, "Well, how far back should I go?" And I'm like, "As far back as you want." And why is that so important? It's important for two reasons. One, you start to understand them, who they are, and what they care about. Because the arc of their story and what happened is going to give you so much insight into them. And then you can take that insight and use it to get what you want authentically. Remember, it's shared action, it's not manipulation. And that's how you form a connection with somebody. Because if they're intently listening to your story, maybe asking some questions along the way, that's awesome. Like, I love it when somebody does that to me. Okay, so ask what's your story, close the front door, listen, ask some questions. Second, okay, you're getting down to business, you talk about something. Don't ask somebody what they think about something because we feel first. So, two millimeter shift here that unlocks so much more. Ask them, how would you feel about something? Not what do you think about it? How do you feel about this? So you're talking about a deal. Well, how would you feel about starting a partnership with us? How would you feel about increasing what you buy from us, right? Instead of saying, what do you think about it? Thinking is like, all right, I'm supposed to sit back and think and I don't know. And then people kind of pause and they hesitate and they get back to you. And then, okay, if you ask how somebody feels about something, they give you an unguarded, quick, intuitive answer. And they're just like, yeah, it's just how I feel about it. Whatever. I don't have to give you my reasons, quote unquote. And those feelings and intuitions are grounded in reasons. So if you say, okay, look, how would you feel about doubling what you buy from us? And if they're like, oh yeah, totally, that sounds great. Okay, cool. That was like a quick, positive reaction. If they're like, well, I don't know, I got to think about it. Okay, well, there's hesitation there. And then what's the hesitation? Okay, well, what's that third question you should ask? When you either a barrier is obviously there or you need to see if a barrier is there, just say, what would stop you from moving forward with this? Identify the barrier and then navigate it. And if you bring those three questions to every conversation, particularly with a new person, the first one, what's your story? You get so much information about getting what you want.
That first question about what's your story, the potential of that is so great. It's so much better than just what do you do. In other words, what's your job? What do you do for work? You're asking them to tell you how they see themselves, which,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, that what a great insight. Trust me, Josh, I'm taking some very deep mental notes on this because this is stuff that I see so many applications for. Um, Talk to me about nonverbal stuff. When we're trying to be persuasive, what do we do that helps? What do we do that detracts?
We think that persuasion is all about the words we say. Words are super important. I could speak some words right now that would make you feel great or terrible. Fine. And sometimes persuasion is as little as 7% words. What? That's weird. Research shows that sometimes our verbal liking of somebody, essentially kind of how we experience them and how much we like them based on what they're saying, is the words that they say. That means 93%, up to 93% is something else. What is it? Okay, well, um, 30, 38% of it is tone, and up to 55% of it is body language. Well, why is tone so important? Because if I tell you, Bryan, that's a great idea. Okay, I sound positive, enthusiastic. If I say, Bryan, that's a great idea. Well, same words, totally different.
I'm picking
And
up a little
then
different vibe there.
And then for anybody watching this on video, what did I do there? I rolled my eyes in contempt. Okay, so we'll get to body language in a second. So what's the best tone to adopt? Well, first of all, a calm tone because do you know anybody who has ever said in a crisis, you know what I want? A frantic leader. Nobody ever says that. So on balance, a calm tone is good. And when you can bring some enthusiasm to things, like if you're really passionate about something and you go up on a stage and it's just like boring monotone, there's no passion there. And again, we feel first, which means you need to feel about what you're talking about. Okay, cool. And you also have to listen to the tone in your counterpart. If their tone is hesitant, irritated, negative, something like that, you need to figure out what's going on. Is there something about you? Is it something about what you're saying? Or is it something totally unrelated? When people feel stressed, not about you or what you want to talk about, but about something else in life, that oftentimes comes through in their tone. And you have to at least observe it and figure it out, or you might even just call it out. You're like, do you mind if I ask if everything's okay? It seems like something's on your mind. And then they say, look, I'm sorry. It's not a good time. I'm dealing with some stuff, some personal stuff. Can we talk tomorrow? Because if you don't observe that it's a bad time for somebody and you press on something now, you're probably not going to get what you want because it's a bad time. Okay, body language. Watch for signs of contempt, like eye rolling. That's one thing to really pay attention for. And here's a really stealthy one. Watch for fake smiles. Anybody can generate a fake smile. You simply raise both corners of your mouth. Looks like this. Americans do it all the time. Ha ha. What do you look for when somebody smiles at you? If you can instantaneously, when you see the smile happen, look at their eyes, you cannot fake a real smile because something happens with the eyes, where the corner of the eyes also go up. So if you only see somebody raising the corners of their mouth, it's a fake smile. And that's really good to know. Positive body language is uplifting and it's not dominant. One thing, if you look at Elon Musk, Angela Merkel, Jamie Foxx, is they're doing this thing called hand steepling. I'll show it on the screen where basically their fingers are touched together and pointing up. So that's one recommendation for your audience: steeple your hands. One more thing I'll say about what I call going beyond words is likability. You cannot control if somebody likes you, and you can control if you're likable. And if you are likable, lots of people are going to like you. And when you like somebody, you are so much more eager to work with them. And when you dislike somebody, you don't want to. I was talking to somebody in real estate a couple of weeks ago, and he said he does like 8 and 9 figure deals, like 50, 100 million plus deals. And he said, we left 5% on the table because we don't want to work with this guy, and the people throughout the process hate working with this guy. And 5% of $100 million is $5 million. And that's like on the profit side of things, right? Because they still have to pay for development and everything. That's a lot of money because they didn't like them and nobody likes them. Being likable matters, and being disliked is also really important. And the really cool point about all this stuff is that if you learn how to go beyond words, watch your tone, your body language, you're likable, and the other things that I talk about in that chapter, even if you don't get the words right, all of those things uh, significantly increase the chances of persuasion. And if you get the words a little bit wrong, people forgive that because you're likable and your tone was good and your body language was good. So you're forgiven so much.
Okay, one final question before we wrap things up, Josh. Talk to me about the granny test. What is it and why does it matter?
Everything in the first 8 chapters is for naught if you cannot pass the granny test. It's the best test of them all. Simple, not easy. Here it is. Would your granny understand what you're saying? Granny is not stupid. Granny is smart and she's not an expert. And if you cannot explain your ideas to your granny, then they're not simple and they're not clear. And the flip side of this is that simplicity and clarity are superpowers. And if you can develop the ability to explain complicated things clearly and simply, it is so powerful. So, can you pass that test? Incidentally, I taught at a couple of highly ranked schools when I was in academia, and juniors and seniors at these highly ranked schools definitely could not pass the granny test. And yet, when you see somebody who can, it is powerful. And even if your words are quote unquote right in a logical sense, if they're not clear, it's your fault and it's your problem.
So all those big 50 and 75-cent words I've been saving up to use to impress people so they can see how smart I am and will go along with what I'm saying, that may not be the best idea.
Incidentally, when people deploy language in an attempt to make themselves sound smart, it actually makes the audience see them as less smart, less intelligent, and less persuasive. So all those
Wow.
fancy 50, 75-cent, $1 words, they're actually unpersuasive and sometimes anti-persuasive.
All right. The book is called How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art of Science and Persuasion. Joshua Bandoch is the author. And Josh, you also had a TED Talk out there, and I'm going to include a link to that in today's show notes. Where can people get their hands on your book?
You can buy this book, How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion, anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Walmart, your local bookstore, anywhere books are sold. And you can learn more about me, find me on LinkedIn, or check out my website, joshuabandoch.com. And you can find links to the TED Talk there, and Brian will link to it as well, and just learn more about what I do. Those are all great ways to find me and to find the book.
This is one of my favorite interviews ever, and I appreciate you coming on the show. I hope we can do this again.
100% Brian. It's a pleasure. Great conversation. Thank you. Thank you.